Hey guys, Jeremy here, back with another trainer video. Today we're going to be looking at a single raise pot heads up. So the small blind's going to open 2.5 and the big blind is going to call with this range here. You can pause the video and take a look at the range if you want. You see we're missing most of our really good hands because those would 3-bet, and then we're missing all of the very bad hands, even including hands like 7-2 suited and 6-2 suited. This is just what we would call. And then obviously our opponent's range is going to be about 80% of hands. And then the solver AI, whatever, kind of prefers if you give it the option to bet 120 or check. Although if you bet, for example, 80 or check, it's the same EV. And if you bet 100 or check, it's the same EV. And if you bet 40 or check, it's the same EV. So it doesn't really matter in terms of what you bet here in this spot. For this exact sim, we'll just use the 120 because that's what it chose. And just a couple things to note are that when our opponent is betting, when the small blind here is betting so large on the flop, their check back range is going to contain a lot more of the medium hands. Whereas if he was betting for kind of the smaller, 33% size, King 8 would bet all the time. King 6 would get into the betting range, where we see here that these hands are now just checking back. So that will influence our turn decisions a little bit. But overall, no matter what your opponent is doing on the flop here, the turn strategies will remain relatively the same. There will never be massive differences, but there will be small, kind of subtle frequency differences. But usually the combo choice will remain the same. And then, yeah, we're going to take a look at how to play at a position here on various turns. And then the board is obviously Jack 8-6 with the flush draw. Just kind of picking arbitrary boards here to take a look. The last thing in the setup is that I've given it 4 sizes here to choose from, just so it captures. These are static sizes that I gave it. This is just so it kind of captures all the different options. Another way to do this would be to set it up with the dynamic in 2 sizes, but then sometimes it doesn't choose like the very small size or the very large size, and it kind of opts for like a middling strategy because that's what collects the most EV for just using 2 sizes or using 1 size. So in a lot of these spots, I personally won't be splitting between 4 sizes. So we'll just try to use this more as an exercise rather than, okay, this is what we're going to do. Okay, so here, this is a perfect example of a spot where I would not split again between these sizes. I imagine that this solution will be mainly these 2 large sizes, mainly around pot. I think I would just play pot or check here, or something like b66 or check. Okay, so onto our actual hand. Every king is, strong enough to bet here, I would say. Although he will be checking back. Like already we can kind of cheat and take a look here and see like he is checking back a lot of King X that beats our hand. So specifically our hand, especially when we're talking about betting pot or check, I think is a fine check. I think that having the 5 is relevant for checking as well. Blocking some of the hands that he could be calling with, but not many. So yeah, going to be splitting here, I believe, with mainly checking would be my guess. Yeah, very, very little betting, only 5%. And obviously we're not folding the king and we're not raising this. This hand is too weak to raise. I think the bottom of our check raising range here would be 2 pairs in terms of our value. And then obviously, our draws and our bluffs. I think that because the board is so draw heavy, we don't really need to have bluffs that aren't like a decent equity draw here. And this spot overall on the turn, after it goes check check on this board, because the board has 2 different available straight draws and a flush draw, it's quite easy to play out of position because a lot of your bluffing hands are just equity based. Whereas if you get a board that's kind of more disconnected, it becomes a bit more challenging to have enough bluffs when you have to start peeling from your kind of no equity air region. But here, we're not at an advantage. There's tons of available draws, so we kind of just build our bets around having some equity. But we'll see. So yeah, nothing to do but call here. I think that we don't have a lot of flush draws in range. The only ones that we would really have in range would be like 8x of hearts and king x of hearts. And occasionally, you know, some queen x of hearts and ace x of hearts that, first of all, just called pre, and second of all, just called the turn, because, you know, you have some showdown value. But overall, I think even after he checks back the flop, he probably still has more flushes than us. Definitely has more 9-7. So I don't think leading makes a lot of sense here on the river. And again, really nothing to do but call. I think that I would consider raising in game, but yeah, it just seems a little bit too thin. You can see it was close though. No, it was not that spot. And yeah, it was close between raising for the small size. It's wouldn't have been a huge mistake to raise for the small size. Let's just make sure that what I was saying was correct here. And yeah, the pot is almost exclusively the only size used. We're not even using the super large size here because we're at such a disadvantage in kind of nut combos, even when it goes check check. And also the board is double flush draw, triple straight draw. There's 3 available straight draws, 2 available flush draws, which you the board's going to change a lot by the river, which just kind of inherently favors in position. And let's see, can we ever have leads here? Does like 8x of hearts want to lead? No. So even when you do have a flush, you want to check it to kind of protect your other hands. You don't want to start building this leading range with all your good hands and kind of abandoning all of your hands that aren't a flush. And you can see here that in position we'll still be betting, even sometimes with hands like king 9, hands like king 10. These hands that would call you anyways are going to bet themselves, is what I'm trying to say. So it doesn't really make sense to lead a flush here, considering we have so few of it and we're not at an advantage. And then facing the bet, king 5 mainly calling. Yeah, it's quite close. It's quite close. Really, the bottom of our all-in is going to be flushes here. There's, what's 9-7 doing? So flushes and straights. All right, let's move on. Okay, so again, a spot where I would play pot or check. The medium size does make some sense here because your weaker jack X that still want to bet, like jack 9, jack 10, could bet for that size. Same with like 8-9, ace 8. But I think all of those hands could also just go into pot or check and be totally fine. So that's what I would play here. I think that this hand does perform well, betting it for pot. It also just has some showdown value being king high, and we can go for the check call, I believe, depending on the size that he bets. If he bets pot again, maybe we can't, but if he bets, you know, like b40, I think that we could absolutely check call this, obviously. So we rolled relatively low. We're going to go for the check here, but it wasn't low enough. It does mainly want to bet. Kind of the classic poker advice, right? You could bet, you could check, you could raise, you could fold, you could call. Doesn't matter what you do. And then the river, we're too strong to bluff. We actually do have some showdown value. He will check back some king highs here on the river. Although, even though we have some showdown value, it looks like we were going for a bluff there. Now the river's interesting. We obviously beat all the bluffs. I don't think he's bluffing king 10 or king queen. So the question becomes, do we want to raise? Do we want to call? Do we want to fold? I think they're all pretty close here. Obviously, folding is never going to be plus EV. Folding's always going to be 0. I think calling in this spot is going to be 0 as well. I really doubt that we have 2 positive blockers enough to justify this being plus EV. And then raising is interesting. It really becomes a question of like how much king of diamonds is he bet folding and how much 9 of hearts is he bet folding. I don't think he really has any 9 of hearts that's bet folding here, at least not very much. And then I think he does have some king of diamonds that is bet folding, but those would be like value bets. So it wouldn't be crazy. I'll go with the roll here. I think these are all very, very close, and we'll go with the fold. Oops, just logged out here. Go back to the trainer. Sometimes my Chrome does that. Let's make sure that we're in the right spot here. So check, check. And yeah, we'll take a look here. So it was the 7 of spades. Again, some splitting. I would simplify to pot or check, I said here, which is actually a bit too big. You do want to go for more of the medium size, it looks like. And again, I guess that's because kind of this Jack X region is a bit too thin to bet for pot. This kind of region that your bets are built around. Although there's very, very few hands here. In fact, I don't see any hands. I don't really see any hands that want to just bet. See a little bit of Queen 9 with the flush draw here. Wants to bet. Yeah, that's about it though. So when no hand wants to do one action, it's always going to be very close. So something to consider, I guess. We went for, what did we go for? We went for the check. We see that King 9 is actually mainly betting, so this was the main mistake in the hand. I said that on a 30 I would check, but it looks like it's not quite. I mean, I guess if we go with what I said we were doing, probably it will check now with that frequency, but given that it wanted to use the medium size, it was mainly betting. So let's take a look. And yeah, I guess on a 30 it would check, but it's quite close. And there's some combos that are just betting pure. And if we take a look at the next action, we can usually see why that was. So we're getting a lot of hands that we dominate to fold, even folding out King 10, which is great for our hand, obviously. Folding out some hands like King 7, King 8. So when we do hit a king, we're going to be a bit stronger. As in, our king is going to have more value when we hit a king. And then obviously we have blockers to the calling region because he's never folding a 9. And then obviously we have our equity. So all that considered, all that combined, that's going to be one of the hands that is betting pure. Certain combos. Same with Queen 9. And yeah, a little bit of the double straight draw here with 10-5 as well. So a couple hands that are losing EV between, this should give us a cleaner look. See that, yeah, King 9 is losing some EV, certain combos. Queen 9, certain combos of Queen Jack are betting pure. And certain low flush draws that can't check raise or check call would lose EV because, you know, if you can't check raise or check call, if your opponent, if you have a flush draw and you check it to your opponent, like why would you check it in the first place? You could just bet it. Okay. Everything, again, very, very, very close. So we went for the check. Faced a bet here from our opponent. And yeah, we can call because we have enough showdown value. We can check raise because, again, all of those properties, absolutely fine hand to bluff. We decided to go for the check, and it went check, check. River was a jack. And yeah, what surprised me is that you see there is we do have a little bit of showdown value, but I guess that doesn't matter very much. It's not enough showdown value to be super relevant, and we do have good blocking effects. So yeah, even King 10 bluffing, which again surprises me a little bit. I probably would have structured my bets more in terms of like, if I did have a king high, it would be the ones that don't have as much showdown value, like King 5 and King 4. Going for the bets, or instead of, you know, checking a hand like 5-3, I probably would have bet it. Or just have underbluffed this spot, one of the two. Having missed flush draws makes sense to bluff the river because now you really, really, really unblock his folds. You unblock his kind of air that just snap folds the river. Because he would have, you know, bluffed those on previous streets. Offsuit hands as well as actual flush draws. Okay. All right, back to you can bet, you can check. You can bet any size. I would play I guess this medium size or check. I guess out of these options, I would play either 50 or 100. And the solution probably has a little bit of b25, but I guess I would just play 50 or check here given these options. I think on a 52, we can obviously go for the check, but I'm going to go for the bet. I think that the only reason it's so low there is because of all of the splitting that's happening on the turn. We'll take a look at this one after. You'll notice that we're kind of missing, well, we're not kind of missing, we're missing larger sizes here. And when I actually open the sim, I'll give it some larger sizes, and you'll see that there probably is some betting with larger sizes. But the reason that they don't add a lot of EV, because if they did add a lot of EV, then they would exist here. It's choosing the two sizes plus all in that it thinks collects the most EV. One of the reasons is because you're going to get raised here when you bet. So let's say your opponent has a straight, or your opponent has, I don't know, a set. If you bet or check here, they're going to reopen, and then you can re-raise or a check raise, and you can kind of collect your EV in that way. You don't need to bet 3x pot here or shove yourself. So I'd be very surprised if there's any shoving here. And I'll also be surprised if there's any, if there's a lot of huge overbets like 3x pot. Because I don't think that in theory that our opponent is super capped here. He'll have some flushes, obviously. Okay, all that considered, I think that on this roll, we're going to go for a B43 bet. Pot obviously makes some sense. The question becomes, how thin does he raise versus pot? Does he raise enough worse hands that we could just bet 3-bet shove? I'm not sure. So we're going to go for B40 here. Get called by queen 6, that's good. No checking with this hand, which is interesting. I would have thought that it doesn't have properties that go either way between checking. Obviously we're going to have some flushes here that check raise. I'm surprised that this never check raises. Or at least very low frequency. Okay. So let's narrow it down to one bet size and take a look at that solution. And if we go into our flushes, you can see that there are a couple flushes that kind of bet more often, but no flush is really losing EV by betting or checking. The EV difference, again, if we go into compare EV, you'll see that everything is mostly white. In fact, the only one that's, according to this, losing any EV is Ace 7 and King 8, but it's a very small amount. Okay, so yeah, we went for the bet, I believe, in game. Is that what we did? Yeah, we went for bet. I say in game. In the trainer. We went for the bet. That's an interesting raise size. I wonder if that's the actual raise size. Just saying he has a flush or a bluff or a set, I guess, is kind of like a, saying he has 2s plus or a bluff. It's kind of a very interesting raise size there. Usually people raise a bit more deep polar, but I guess considering the way that he played the flop, yeah, okay. So it was not the right raise size. He is raising quite a narrow range still, but you can see it becomes a bit more deep polar once he raises to these small sizes. Okay. So we went for a bet, went for a call. The river was the 9 of diamonds. So already, because I switched it to B50 or checked on the turn, already it's switching over to this kind of bigger large bet. Before it was B40 and B100. Now it's got B150 and B25. And let's just see what the what the all size strategy will look like here. I guess I'll leave all in, although it's never choosing all in like I thought. Okay. Obviously, these aren't the sizes that I would use. I wouldn't try to do a 9-way split here. This is to just get a rough idea. And we see that the very, very large overbet is almost never used, kind of capping out at 2x pot. Which, again, makes a lot of sense because, let's say, you, again, if you did shove, what are the hands that are calling you? Like if I played, let's say we had to play shove or check, like your other buttons were broken. On a poker set, you're playing on, you know, ACR and your bet is bugged because it's ACR. So all the hands that can go all in, all the hands that are strong enough to go all in, are essentially what? Flushes. Queen 10 is, I guess, with the heart, is strong enough to go all in. And we did shove. The hands that call us, even the ones that are folding, right? Except for some of these like superhero calls like 10-9. And I guess maybe these Jack X would never raise us, but they would bet. All of these hands are hands that would have, we'll just leave it like this for now, kind of like hands that would have either raised or bet when we checked. So we collect money from those hands regardless. Like let's say we B25 the river. The only hands that were not raising us, but we're calling, were these like hero call portions, like 10-9, the Jack X with the one heart. So there are exploitative reasons for you to maybe go all in here in spots like this, or in general using sizes that are bigger than you're supposed to, but in theory there's not a lot of reason to go for sizes like that. Okay, and then obviously 10-4, mixing between all the different sizes. Once I guess I kind of fixed the sim, it looks like it is checking some of the time. All right. Getting kind of rambly and kind of these like rabbit hole spots that don't really mean a lot, but that's okay. Still some interesting things. So again, we saw that on the 7 of spades, it was going for this medium better check. I think that on the 7 of diamonds, also the medium better check makes sense. This hand does get some protection in the sense that there's like one over hands that will fold, like king, for example, king 3 of clubs. You can get one over to fold here. You can get something like maybe king queen specifically has to fold the turn versus 50, and that has 2 overs. But otherwise, our hand is just strong enough to bet. So even if we don't get a lot of protection with the B50, we get a lot of value. We get called by a worse 8, we get called by a worse 7 or worse 6, bunch of draws. I think this hand will bet more than it checks, would be my guess. I think the ace of hearts is kind of relevant in that we do block some of his strongest traps, as in the ace jack that checks back the flop is going to be ace jack with the ace of hearts, I think. Let's take a look here. Again, we're kind of cheating. No, we just bet all the ace jack because we're playing we're playing kind of this like more polar strategy. Even with the aces, with the ace of hearts, we are just betting it. So no, that was completely wrong. So I guess the ace of hearts is not super relevant then. If anything, it blocks less aces on the turn, as in less pocket aces, because the ones with the heart are betting more often. So it does obviously block the nut flush draws that he checked back. But yeah, I don't think it's super relevant either way. So we're gonna go for the bet. Okay. You know, obviously, we're sitting here with the ace of hearts when a flush completes. As in, we have the nut flush blocker, so it's always a consideration to bluff. I think that there's no reason to use this hand to initially bluff. As in, if we do have a very significant portion of 300% here, which I think this spot is a little bit different. in that we will have a bit more of this super large bet than our opponent compared to the spot where it was the what was it yeah, it was the two of hearts on the turn and then the river. I think here he actually has less flushes and less straights and less sets too. So having this kind of 3x pot size does make sense in my opinion. But this hand I think we'll just always check, as in like we don't need to start bluffing with an 8. We have showdown value. And now once we face the bet, it does become reasonable to start thinking about bluffing. I don't think that we're actually going to use this combo to bluff raise though. We do block some of the flushes that would check back the flop, obviously. We don't block anything else though. Does he have any bluffs with the ace of hearts? Ace 5 off with the ace of hearts would call the turn versus half, maybe. Seems like a pretty loose float. I guess he does have ace 10 and ace 9 that would turn itself into a bluff on this river if they had the ace of hearts. But they do have showdown value. Yeah, not an easy spot. It's never an easy spot playing out of position here. And if you're really, really unsure, let's say you're playing in game and you're unsure, you can always go by your number or you can go by your opponent's tendencies. I think that I'm leaning towards folding and instead using as an all-in bluff more of like the 10-9 with the 10 of hearts, 9-8 with the 9 of hearts. Hands that were strong enough to bet the turn for some protection, but are now, like this, that are now not strong enough to bet the river. But they also block some of the trap straights, which will call some of the time. And they don't necessarily... No, they still interact with the bluffing range. So yeah, not an easy spot. I'm going to fold this one. And you see that, yeah, all in would be a huge mistake, and raising it for a bluff would be not a mistake. Let's see if not a huge mistake, but still a mistake. Let's see if I was right about which ones we were going to bluff here on the river. Also, let's just take a look. And yeah, the 300% I think does exist here. Let's make sure. Because sometimes when you give it only the option to bet 2 sizes, it has to kind of compromise, and if you give it a bunch of different sizes, it can really analyze. And you see that once I did give it these smaller overbet sizes, it chose them more often than the 300, but having a large bet makes more sense here to me than the other spot, is what I was trying to say. Okay, so ace 8. It looks like the 8 of hearts is kind of like, is that merge betting on the turn there, b40? No, it's just a value bet, right? He's not folding a better ace, or 8. I mean, yeah, he is. He's folding 9, so... Okay, and 9-8. Yeah, I mean, be careful doing stuff like this in game. I feel like it's unrealistic some of the time. So, yeah. Good river for us, obviously. You can see we don't need to check very often because we kind of hit this river a decent amount. So we check. He goes for the bet. And having the 8 of hearts is better than having the ace of hearts. Okay. I guess that makes sense. And would we use these as a bluff? Yes, we would. I'm not sure if you can see. You have to click on it first before you go into drawing mode. If you see the strategy here, it would pure raise if we had it, and I overestimated how much we would have these hands, because it looks like these hands are actually not betting the turn very often. Not for b50 at least. You gotta be careful with solvers in general sometimes, because especially if you're allowing it to split on previous streets, because sometimes you get, your river solutions are going to be very sensitive to previous street solutions. So you saw that we almost never had 9-8 on the river there. That's because it was splitting it into b25. So if you're playing 50 or check, which is what I was, now you're going to have 9-8. What happened in the real hand? I forget. Yeah, we bet the turn. I have a terrible memory lately. It's great for playing poker. All right. And yeah, of course we would check these hands. And these are the types of hands that we would use as a bluff on the river, although using ace-8 with the 8 of hearts would be fine. One thing you can do is take a look at what your opponent's range kind of looks like after you raise, and you can kind of understand why. You see that while he does have these ace-high flushes, they're not super common in his range. You know, having only half a combo each. And we do block, with the ace of hearts specifically, we do block ace-5 with the ace of hearts, like what I was talking about before, and a little bit of like ace-9 with the ace of hearts, and ace-10 with the ace of hearts. So there are some bet folds, whereas when you have the 8 of hearts, there are no hands which are pure bet folding. We see that 8-7 off is hero calling us down with the 8 of hearts sometimes. 8-6, he doesn't have the 8 of hearts. So, 10-8, again, has a little bit of the 8 of hearts. Also, it's not super clear whether people would actually merge bet 10-8 here with the 8 of hearts. Anyways. Okay, again, these spots are quite easy compared to other spots, as in when you have your kind of pure air region, you don't have to usually do much with it. Although it looks like here there is some pure air betting. That's kind of cool. Having the 4-2 of spades unblockers. Nothing to do once we do face the bet. So yeah, Potter check. Let's just simplify it down. We can see already that some of these are not flush draws. Okay, it looks like it was more of a function of the splitting where we could bet it for like B25. So yeah, never mind. I was gonna be surprised for a second there. I was thinking, oh, that's cool, we could bet it. But then I remembered that I have it splitting to 4 sizes. So again, gotta be careful looking at your sims if you have major splits going on. There doesn't seem to be any. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any bets or bluffs here, except for a little bit of like your ace high region, which I would argue is not, like your pure air region. These hands have enough showdown value as well. But you can start turning some of your very worst ones with the best unblockers. You notice that we're using built around having a heart. Or in the ace-3's case, the spade. I think that while our hand looks like it could use some protection, I don't think that it's quite strong enough to be able to bet for protection if our opponent's playing correctly on the flop, which I'm willing to bet that this opponent is playing correctly on the flop. I would play, again, this kind of medium-sizer bet. That's what we saw. It's usually happening on these kind of straight cards, and this hand's just too weak, I believe. And even with the B25 option, this hand is too weak to bet. Definitely calling the turn. It's not because our straight draw is amazing. If we do hit our straight draw, we're more than likely still folding on a decent amount of versus certain bet sizes on the river. So it's not like we have a great straight draw, but we have a pair to go with our straight draw, so obviously we're going to continue. Not turning hands like this into a bluff either on the turn, I should have mentioned. You're going to turn more hands that have like the 7 or the 9. Having the 4 is not really a relevant blocker, as well as it has objectively less equity than a 7 or a 9. Leading the river conceptually makes sense here. He's not going to be playing a 6 like this very often, whereas we're going to be playing almost all of our 6x like this. So yeah, that makes sense, but never with this hand. This hand doesn't accomplish anything, I think, by betting pot. It has enough showdown value to check, and it doesn't really get too many hands to fold that are better than it. And let's take a look at that river solution, because that's kind of interesting. I wonder what hands we would bluff. I'm assuming it's more of like the flush draw, kind of king high region, kind of, you know, the hands that have slightly enough showdown value to call the turn, or at least enough equity. For example, a hand like 10-9, we're obviously not folding the turn, but we can't just always check raise it. We do check call it some of the time. A hand like that has very, very little showdown value on the river could then start turning itself into a bluff on the 6, I believe. And yeah, that's what turns itself. Not really any king highs though. Yeah, okay, we do have the king high flush draw region as well. Makes sense. But a hand like this does not really make too much sense. Do a couple more hands here. Didn't we already get this turn? I feel like we already have this turn. No, I'm crazy. So on the turn being paired, I think that I would just play 50% or check here. I think that the board is kind of too high in the sense that, let's say you did have pocket 2s, pocket 3s, you know, the hands that would want to, you know, be 25, they're not strong enough to be able to bet for protection. So I don't think having the small size makes too much sense here. I think this hand will want to mainly bet having the 10 of hearts. 7 of diamonds combo considerations is not super relevant. I think that spade and heart is relevant, and then having club or diamond is not super relevant. Especially heads up when, you know, our opponent will have all the 6-7, so it doesn't really matter that we block 6-7 of diamonds, for example. Whereas if you were playing a tighter range configuration, like let's say you called the big blind versus min raise and 6 max versus cutoff. Now it does matter to have the 7 of diamonds, because now you do block 7-6 of diamonds. But here in heads up with super wide ranges, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, I'm interested to see if that's because of splitting or if it's just the hand class doesn't bet very often. This turn will obviously be a very bad turn for the big blind's range, simply because the small blind's going to check back like a lot of its 6x. So, you know, we're out of position, they're in position. Out of all of the turns, this is probably one of the worst ones, I would say. So maybe that is why we're not betting very often. I imagine our range is not betting very often, at least. So if we do bet, we're kind of saying we have like a flush or a 6. And I'm just wondering, does the 10 of hearts block more folds than it does calls? We don't bet a lot of 8x on the turn here. Maybe some like ace 8, king 8. He definitely has more 8x than we do, especially when he's betting this kind of polar strategy on the flop. So yeah, all that considered, I think the 10 of hearts is kind of working against us here. The 7 as well does block like some frequency of hands like 7-5 that didn't bet the flop, that are just going to clearly call the turn and then fold. So I think we just give this up. Oh, no, we could have bet it. All right. All right. Oh, if we did bet it, we were going to bet it for small size, though. What are we repping for small size? A jack, I guess. I'm not sure I would carve out this small size for jack X. I think I would play more of the larger size, saying we have like a flush or better. So I imagine the turn, we're not betting very often. I'm surprised that this hand specifically wasn't betting very often. Yeah, 83% checking, which is probably the turn we're checking the most on, except for maybe an ace, because on an ace we'll play like super polar large size. Yeah, okay, that's about more what I expected. So it was a function of the splitting rather than the actual hand class. All right. Is there any hand that wants to pure bet here? Some combos of Jack 7, but it's almost identical. The EV. Queen 9 with the Queen of Hearts wants to pure bet. Yeah, okay. Queen Jack, just with the Queen of Hearts though. Again, we have these like low flush draws that actually do lose EV by checking because you can't really check raise and you're not super happy to check call. So, all right, last hand. Sorry, it's just drinking some honey and water. My throat always gets sore when I'm making these videos. I don't know, maybe I'm talking incorrectly or yapping too much. Okay, I don't think we need to bluff this, and I don't think that this gets into the value betting range. This is way too weak to start value betting, so we just have a clear check. I think that this turn is not great for our range. I think that if our opponent's playing correctly, he has just as many straights, if not more straights, just because of preflop ranges. He has pocket tens that we don't. He has more of the strong 10x than we do. So I don't think that this turn is great, and I don't think that this hand is great. So we're just gonna go for the check. I think we're even just gonna check fold here. Usually you're not looking to fold as like a heuristic, I guess, in this node. You're not really looking to fold pairs on board, especially versus a reasonable bet size. You know, he didn't bet 2x the pot or anything like that. So here, though, we have a lot of better hands. Like ace-9 offsuit is a much better hand than 6-5 here. So all that considered, we did roll a 90, but I don't think that this actually calls. I'd even rather have like 6-3 suited, like 6-3 of diamonds than 6-5 here, because when you do hit your 2-pair, I guess it doesn't complete any extra straights, but the 5 interacts a bit more with his bluffs, so yeah. We are calling. Okay. So I was wrong on that one. We are actually calling with some of these weaker, kind of crappy 6x. Let's see if I was right about the 6-3. Maybe I was wrong on the 6-3. No, not wrong, but not right either. They're all just indifferent. There are certain combos that are folding more, but they're all the same EV. And while it is true that ace-9 is a much better hand than 6-5, it looks like we are reaching down to not let our opponent, you know, bluff and get an auto profit bluff spot. We are reaching down to these calls with 6x. Okay. I think I would have slightly overfolded this spot then. Folding these like under pair 6x. King 6 I would have pure called though, so yeah. Nothing crazy either way. We got time for one more. That one wasn't too interesting. Doesn't look like this one's gonna be too interesting as well. We got essentially the same turn, except it's not double flush draw. And as we saw before, we don't have to peel a lot of bluffs from the kind of no equity region. We're gonna be checking different here on the river versus the bet. We have some showdown value. No reason to bluff. We can get the same turn again, okay. Well, we already saw that. Actually, no, we didn't see yet. We didn't see what the strategy was. I mean, my instinct says this hand is just too weak. There's no reason to put it into the betting range, although we are mixing some bets. I wonder if it's because if we bet pot, we're getting some like 10-2 to fold. Or if it was because it's got some B25 in the strategy, and this hand is strong enough to B25. Okay, let's think about whether we should raise. Whether we should put this into the bluff raise. So we can get hands like Jack 4 that check back the flop and now is betting the turn, or a hand like Ace 10 that check back the flop and is now betting the turn. We can get those hands to fold. We have decent equity when called, obviously, by everything except a straight. My instinct says that we have enough of the kind of no pair straight draw region to bluff raise on the turn, and we don't necessarily raise the turn very often here. So that leads me more towards calling with a hand class like this. Okay, I was right. River's interesting because while we obviously have a straight blocker, And you can say, well, he does check back 9-7, he does check back queen 9, and therefore we do block some value bets. We also block jack 9. We block a lot of bluffs as well with the 9. So I think that this hand would never be anything more than indifferent versus a bet on the river. Let's take a look. This will be the last one. Okay, so yeah, 9-8 was only betting because it had some b25 in there. I think as soon as I put the real strategy, well, not the real strategy, you could split here if you wanted to, especially for exploitative reasons, but I think that that's a bit of a rabbit hole. We see that now we're never betting, which makes a bit more sense. The check raise is interesting. I'm going to remove this small amount of b40. That's just because I told the solver to use 2 bets, so it's got 1 bet here that it almost never uses, but that's because I forced it to use 2 bets. And yeah, we would never use a hand class like this, but we would use something like 10-9. So I was more talking about hands like this that we're check raising because we have only a 4.2%, 4.3% check raise. So I thought we had enough hands that check the turn like this to check raise. And then, you'll notice that our check raising range here is like mainly hearts. So you might be thinking, okay, well then, first of all, what are we going to use to bluff the river? Because if we just have missed flush draws, aren't those terrible bluffs on the river? I mean, you can just bluff them anyways. If you don't have anything else to bluff, you could just bluff these on the river. The 9 of hearts is not even a bad blocker, and the 3 of hearts and 2 of hearts specifically don't really block that many missed flush draws on a brick. And then you do have a little bit of this kind of pair region, but again, you might be thinking, okay, well, these have showdown value, like you wouldn't bluff these on the river. Well, if the river is a heart, I think you would. And if the river is a brick, I think you do bluff kind of this missed flush draw region. So let's see if I'm right. Yeah, you do have to bluff the missed flush draw region. There's a little tiny bit of non-flush draw with exactly 9-5, but we're already using all of it. So if you're already using all of it and you still have enough value, then you are using some of these like missed flush draws. You see even ace 7 of hearts is going for it here. Looks like the queen of hearts is the worst blocking card to have. The queen plus the 3, I guess, is one of the worst combinations. Whereas the queen plus the 7 is okay. I guess the 7 of hearts is actually a positive blocker, whereas it doesn't matter so much that the queen is a negative blocker. And if you want to see why something is happening, you can usually just go to the next node, and then you can take a look, and you can see that the queen of hearts is blocking more folds, whereas the 7 blocks, I guess, I don't know, less folds. You see that he has more 9-7 with the 7 of hearts than he does other combos, so it blocks some of the value, and he doesn't really have 7x of hearts to fold. Like if I pull up hearts here, he's just got queen 7 of hearts, but if you have the queen already, you're already blocking it, so you can't double block the same combo, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that's what we're doing, and that's why we're using the 9-3. I feel like if the river wasn't a deuce, like if I put a 4, you could see 9-3 and 9-2 going for it, at least mixing. Yeah, for some reason the deuce is bad here. Again, we could go and take a look. I don't think it's really worth it in this case. Then let's look at a heart. So let's say the river is like, I don't know, the 9 of hearts. How do you have bluffs here? Well, that's when you kind of have to start turning some weird stuff into a bluff. So you see that we're actually turning 10-8 with the 10 of hearts into an all-in bluff here. And also kind of building this quarter pot range for all of the queen x bluffs that we hit on the river. So yeah, this one's not easy to bluff, I would say. It's hard to find the 10-8 two pair all-in shove. And you can see that the EV of checking with 10-8 is actually 0. So if you identify that in game, maybe it is easier to find than not. Let's say it's more of a normal 4 of hearts. You see that we do have to start using these kind of 10-9 queen six with the queen of hearts types hands. So that's one of the reasons why you include hands like this in your check raising range on the turn. There's multiple reasons. It's not just because of this, but this is a nice benefit, I guess you could say. Okay, that's going to be it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.